Grace and peace. I'm Brian Musser, the Baptist Campus Minister at Drexel University, and this is going to be something a little bit different for this channel. Now, it will make a lot of sense, but I am going to be going over some data that I've been paying attention to, that other people have been doing, that I've kind of collated or put together, curated here in this presentation, that just some similarities and things that I have noticed among these different data trends that really help me think about how to minister to young adults. This is in preparation for a presentation I'm doing to a Christian faculty group at Drexel University. A bunch of professors asked me to talk about this. Now, there will be references to all the places where I got this data from at the end, and I'll try to make clear where the data is coming from and how that's connected and what's going on. It's not, I mean, I'm a little bit nervous about how formally cited things are, but if you want more references, I can easily get that to you. I definitely have the books and the sources that stuff is coming from, but not necessarily the exact page numbers and graphs that those things are going on there, but I can easily come up with those. But so this presentation is referred to as Mentoring the 20-something Soul, and Dave Kinnaman, I saw him in a lecture at one point talk about, and this was the tagline, this might be something that's coming up a lot. Dave Kinnaman is the president of the Gardner group, and a lot of their data will be in the kind of the second half of this presentation. But the quote is, "Disciples are handcrafted, not mass-produced." Now, I think that's a truism across the board. I think we see that's what Jesus does, even in his ministry at the very beginning of what is Christianity. I think that actually ties back to, Deuteronomy 6, 4, 5, and through 10. That area. I think disciples have always been handcrafted, not mass-produced. But especially with Generation Z, with the 20-somethings, with the younger millennials, the older Gen Z, what's going on there, I think this is even more precisely true. So the first data I'm going to step into is a book written by Tim Clydesdale and Kathleen Graces-Foley. You can see their credentials there. The 20-something Soul, Understanding the Religious and Secular Lives of American Young Adults. This is the third book I've read by Tim Clydesdale. He's really a sociologist, is now kind of vice provost up at the College of New Jersey. I've had the pleasure of actually meeting him in person. He's doing a lot of research on emerging adulthood, young adults, especially how young adults relate to the faith. The first book that I will look at, I will reference a little bit later. The first year out looked at high school seniors, and then 1 year after their high school, fascinating stuff there. Also, he did the Purposeful Graduate that looked at how dealing with vocation within their college experience to help folks have resilience in the workplace or even in life after college. This book looks at and is a lot of stats on just what 20-somethings in America believe. Now, it was published in 2019, so before the pandemic, and some of the data is coming from like 2016 area and things like that. So we're talking with 20-somethings, we're going to get some Gen Z, a lot of millennials, but a lot of this stuff kind of holds throughout. I would say the pandemic might have changed the data more than the generation did. But from their research, they saw that there are 42 million Americans, 42.7 million Americans that are between the age of 20 and 29, or between the age of 20 and 30. Of those, 12.8 million self-identified as evangelical Protestant, 7.7 million identify as Roman Catholic, 6 million identify as mainline Protestant, 3.8 million identify as some other religion. That includes Judaism, that includes Islam, that would include Hinduism, Buddhism, and But the big thing that everybody talks about all the time is that now there are 12.4 million that are unaffiliated, or refer to them as the nuns. But we see that these percentages are, about 30 Protestant, about 29 unaffiliated, and then 18 Roman Catholic, 14% mainline, and then 9% other. Within that, though, the big thing they did is within these population groups, they, especially with the three big Christian population groups, Evangelical, Roman Catholic, and mainline, they tried to distinguish out between which ones were active, which ones were nominal, and which ones they entitled estranged. Active meant that they attended more than twice a month, and that their spiritual growth was important to them. So they were not just active in attendance, but they were also active in some sort of spiritual growing, or they indicated that was important to them. They've had several measures to be able to figure out what that meant. Nominal meant that they did one of these, but not both. So they either attended more than twice a month, or they indicated that their spiritual growth was important to them, not both. And then the estranged did neither. They attended less than twice a month, and they indicated that their spiritual growth was not, but they still identified as either Evangelical, Roman Catholic, or mainline. So these are the three categories that we saw, and we can see that this nominal group is the largest category in each of the subgroups. So there are more nominal Evangelicals, more nominal Roman Catholics, more nominal mainline than the other two groups as well. So then put it this way, if you combined all of them, there are about 8.8 million self-identified Christians, either Evangelical, Roman Catholic, mainline, that would be considered active. 14.5 million that would be considered nominal, and 2.9 million that would be considered estranged. So this nominal category is by far the largest, but there are still 8.8 million people in their 20s, between the ages of 20 and 30, that are attending Christian services at least twice a month, and say that their Christian growth, their spiritual growth, is an important part of their lives. So that number might be bigger and smaller than you expected, but that's what Clydesdale and Graces-Foley found in the data. Now let's look at the unaffiliated nuns, because we talk about these nuns as if they're one group, but they're a variety of groups there as well. These unaffiliated nuns saw 4 different categories more than anything else. Unaffiliated believers, folks who said that they believe in God and actually practice, but are not willing to identify as any sort of religious group. They are not connected to any of the religions, purposefully not connected. And that's interesting. I just want to point this out, that there are folks that are saying that they are Evangelical Christian or Roman Catholic or mainline Protestant that don't go, and it's not important to them, but they still identify as one of those groups. And then there's another group of folks that are saying they aren't any of these religions. They aren't Jewish, Muslim, Christian of any type, but they're saying they're doing these spiritual practices, whatever they are, and that their spiritual growth is important to them, even though they are not affiliated with any of these groups. That's an interesting category right there. The second and equal is spiritually eclectics. They combined and mixed so many different religions that they can't identify as one specific. They pick up pieces here and there. They're just a mixture of religious faiths, although unaffiliated, not affiliated with one particular religion, but do spiritual practices from multiple religions. Then the 1.4 million are philosophical secularists. Those are the people who don't believe in God, and that's important to them. There is no God, or they don't believe in God, they don't practice, they're not associated with a religion, and that is a conscious decision, and they have reasons to back up that conscious decision. This is an intentional decision to them. They have a worldview that is an important part of. But then the largest group, this 54%, 6.5 million, are different in different secularists. These are guys, the people who just don't really care about religion much. They aren't not religious. They aren't religious. It is an important part of their lives. They aren't dealing with those questions. They haven't answered them. They're not practicing, but they haven't necessarily intentionally made the decision not to practice. They just don't practice is kind of what's going on there. So that's kind of the data, some of the conclusions that are coming out of this. The majority of 20-somethings are religiously indifferent, either nominal or estranged Christians. There's 17 million of them, or indifferent secularists. There's 6.5 million of those. I like the term apatheists. Their theology is just that they don't care. This would kind of be what Christian Smith was getting at with a different generation of this moralistic therapeutic deism. And I think David John Seel refers to them more as functional atheists. What they believe doesn't even matter in how they live their lives. Whether they believe in a God or not, whether they identify as a religion or not, it's just not impacting what's going on in their lives right here and now. And this, I think, agrees with something Clydesdale's previous research pointed out, this first year out book, and that many young adults put religious questions into a lockbox. They just set them aside to deal with them later when their life is at a more settled point. I think this is American pragmatism. It even goes back to some of the stuff Tocqueville saw in that. We use religion when we need it. We're very pragmatic about our religion. If we're trying to answer other life questions, like young adults are trying to answer a bunch of other life questions, we take religion and put it aside until we have a better time and better space to deal with those things. So much uncertainty in 20-something lives. They're answering very practical questions about their lives, putting a lot of these religious questions on hold. They haven't necessarily decided to be not religious or to be religious. They're waiting to another time in their lives to do that. But the other thing I wanted to point out, there are still 8.8 million 20-something Christians actively participating in evangelical, Roman Catholic, and mainline Christianity. That's a significant number. That would be, if they were all in one place, that would be a huge city. That's the population of some states. That is a considerable portion of 1 in 4, maybe, of a little bit 1 in 5 of the entire population. 1 out of every 5 young adults, 20-something young adult, is actually actively practicing in their Christianity, about 20%. Now, going back to some of these, I'm going to jump into data from another source. This is Springtide Research, and I think this has something to do with why so many of them just put religion on the back burner for a while. Look at this stat. This stat, I don't understand this stat. This is so outside of my worldview scope. Participating in religious or spiritual practices doesn't necessarily lead to a sense of purpose. Has participating in religious or spiritual practice helped you discover your purpose? 13% said yes. 87% said no to that. Now, looking at some data that kind of led to this. Discovering purpose. What experiences have helped you discover your purpose? Asking questions, seeking information about things that matter to me is up there, 50. Trauma, hardship, illness, 43. Following beliefs I was taught about how to treat others, 35. Being nice and kind to others. That could lean into religion a little bit, but the way it's looking, it kind of doesn't. Caring for and supporting people in my life, making music or art, being inspired by what someone I look up to is doing with their life, using my knowledge, skills, and abilities to contribute to society, developing expertise or skills, traveling, camping, or hiking in nature, developing my interests and talents by trying things and receiving encouragement from others, being part of a community that values treating others with care and respect. Good ones for discovering a sense of purpose. We got from 50% down to like 18% there. Turning to the next page. Knowledge I have about a religion's understanding of God for a higher power comes in at 16%. Experience of God's presence in my life, 15%. Belonging to a religious or spiritual community, 11. Nothing has helped me or is helping me discover my purpose, 10%. Participating in religious or spiritual practices, 9%. If Americans and if young adults are very pragmatic with how they deal with their religion, if it needs to it needs to connect with their lives, with their purpose, with something. This is saying that most young adults are not seeing what their religious practice as being connected to their life. So therefore it is somewhat explainable with Clydesdale's stuff, especially with the first year out, that they are putting it on the shelf until there's a better time to deal with it, because it's just not important, not practical. Now they're trying to figure out other more important things, more practical things than what's going on. That interests me. Just for a note, Springtide Research Institute, check them out. They're down in the PowerPoint slides at the very end. Those all that research they're really looking at, and this is from a presentation that was looking at mental health, religion, and Gen Z. Fascinating work they're doing there. Got to give them some shout outs on that stuff there. But this idea that their religious faith doesn't connect to their discovering of purpose is, I think, hugely significant for how young adults deal with religion, and the numbers we're seeing in what young adults are doing with religion as well. Now, I want to make this comment, and this is coming back to Clydesdale, and I think it's coming back to his first year out stuff. I'm in student life. I deal with university students. I'm a religious person, so this stuff doesn't make sense to me. I think my 20-somethings were the most important decade of my life to deal with spiritual and religious life, and I processed all my purpose, all these major life questions. I processed it through the lens of spirituality and religion. I did it that way. What this data is suggesting, and I got involved in campus ministry. I got involved in student life. I invested back in the academic setting because it was so important to me. What this is saying is that people like me and people like most of us in student life are the anomaly. Now, we've self-selected, and we have to be very careful with thinking, well, my experience, which led me down this trail, is normative. Now, we might talk to all of our other student life colleagues. We might talk to all of our other campus ministry colleagues. We might talk to all of our other faculty and staff colleagues. And it might be normative to everybody else we talk to within our circle. But that's a self-selected circle. And it might not be the normative student experience. The American young adult might have a very different experience then those of us working in either student life, either academic life, or in like campus ministry life. That might be something we have to be very careful of and realize that the normative student experience might be very different from what we experience ourselves. So I just thought that like this data triggered those thoughts in my head as well. I did not put my spiritual and religious life on a lockbox. I got that lockbox broken open, but that might not be, according to Clydesdale's data, that's not the normative experience for young adults. So turning over, and the interesting thing they did with this, the Clydesdale's data in the 20-something soul, is they took these active ones in evangelical, Roman Catholic, and mainline ministries and asked why were they active where they were active. Not necessarily why they were active, but why did they choose to be active in these specific churches and things like that. They did basic data with a bunch of ones, and then they did these extended interviews with a bunch. And the number one answer was the same across all three. The number one answer for why evangelical Protestants get plugged into the church that they get plugged into is because there is a community of young adults that look like them, think like them, and kind of react like them already there. That's why they got plugged into it. Same is true with Roman Catholics. The community is already there. Same thing is true for mainline Protestants. They get plugged in. Young adults, number one reason why young adults across all flavors of Christianity get plugged into the church communities that they get plugged into, because there is already a community, young adult community that is somewhat like them. Number two reason was different for all the different things. For evangelical Protestants, it was the church's Bible teaching, the quality of the church's teaching of Scripture. For Roman Catholics, it was these spiritual experiences, especially the Eucharist. How like that was what kept drawing them back. In mainline Protestantism, it was the church's vision for creating a better world. It was this social justice picture and how that vision was expressed. So the number two reason differed with each of the different subgroups. The number three reason was the same as well. And this was relatable leadership. The leadership somehow connected with the young adult population. I think that's the one. Well, that's the one we're going to look at moving forward. But I mean, I think that's the one we can actually have the most sort of impact on. I mean, that will help us develop the community that will attract others, and each of the other subcategories are going to be very distinct for each of our different things as well. So, and this relatable leadership falls into some of the stuff I've seen from other research projects as well. Going back to the very initial quote, disciples are handcrafted, not mass-produced. That's what we're going to be leaning into for the second half of this presentation. Hit pause here. This is kind of the first half of the information. Get into some more information later. If you have any comments, drop down in the comment section and check it out. Next, we're going to be looking at some Barna stuff and bringing back some more Springtide research as they kind of intersect there as well. So if this would be a good time to take a breather. If not, let's move on. Barna did some fascinating research. I've never seen a research project like this. This is very exciting for what's going on. They they did some research on 13 to 17-year-olds global, calling them the open generation because they were more open to Jesus, more open to Scripture, more open to making an impact than expected. You can check all this out at Barna.com, the open generation. There will be a link in the comment section below, and the last slide has these references. Talking about this research, though, I don't know if you can pull this up on here, but they surveyed 24,870 teens between 13 and 17 from across the globe, about 1,000 different teenagers in 26 different nations, 16 different languages, 71 questions were there, and just a bunch of different things going on here. And we have like the only, like, this is amazing, and I'll probably be unpacking this open generation stuff for years to come. There's a lot of data there. You can check it out on those. The only like caveat I would say is there's a big gray area there in the Middle East and China. So I wouldn't use global because that is a significant hole in the research. But other than that, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, South America, Africa, Europe, North America, Australia, and even New Zealand comes in. That I'm very excited about this research. Hopefully you can kind of tell that some of the data they've found, and this there's a lot more than we will cover. I was just going to bring out some very specific things from the research. When they were interviewing Christians, they found that Christians fell into 4 categories, which I think we can kind of see some overlap between this and Clydesdale's things. 10% they referred to as resilient disciples, 38% habitual churchgoers, 30% nomads, lapsed Christians, and then 22% prodigals or ex-Christians. So I think the estranged from Clydesdale would be overlapping the gray and the yellow a little bit. I believe the nominal would overlap the gray and the orange, and I believe the active would be the blue and the first parts of the orange as well. It's a little bit different, but these are some of the questions. And one of the things they asked is, what makes a resilient disciple? Because this idea of the resilient disciple, they were saying, is categorically different in how they behave, what they believe, what they practice than any of the other groups. This idea of the resilient disciple is answering questions differently than any other group. What are some of the things that fed into what is becoming a resilient disciple? Looking at some of this stuff. And the thing they saw is there's a correlation here. Can't prove causation. There's other things going on here. But one of the very interesting points is this mentoring piece. Folks who have been mentored in their spiritual faith are more actively just as motivated, more Bible engaged, and more likely to be resilient disciples. What do they mean by mentoring? They had about 5 different points where they try to figure out if somebody was spiritually mentored. There is someone in my life who encourages me to grow spiritually. I have close personal friends who were adults for my church. There is someone in my life who models prayer for me. I regularly attend church to be connected with those older than me. And a spiritual mentor has taught me how to read the Bible. Those 5 points. So low mentoring would be 0 of those statements. Moderate mentoring would be a 1, 2, or 3. High mentoring would be 4 or 5. And they saw that those in the high mentoring had statistically, like, it was statistically significant differences than anybody else. So high mentoring 12%, moderate mentoring 55%, low mentoring 32%. Jumping from this Barna stuff just to support it with some springtide. These are some of the numbers. So 67% would be receiving some sort of mentoring, adding the 12 and the 55 together to get 67. And look at these numbers. I don't feel like I need to hide who I am at my place of worship or spiritual community. 65% agree with that. I trust I am cared about at my place of worship or spiritual community. 73% is there. I feel safe being my full self at my place of worship or spiritual community. 66%. Now, I am significantly worried that these are in the 30s, but it shows that this idea of like 67% have some sort of relationship with a young adult that is feeding, an older adult that is feeding into a young adult is kind of showing up the same here as well. And here, I feel like I can have conversations about some of the big questions in life with people in my place of worship, a spiritual community, 63%. So I know who to turn to within my place of worship for spiritual community, or spiritual community for spiritual guidance, 67%, right on there as well. So this idea that about 67%, 12% get high mentoring, 55% get moderate mentoring, is ringing true with some of these answers from the Springtide research as well. But look at how those that are being mentored are just different. High mentoring, 66% say they always feel deeply cared for by those around them. 61%, someone believes in me. 59%, optimistic about the future. 55%, secure in who I am. 50%, able to accomplish my goals. 43%, satisfied with my life choices. I feel I am important to others, 57%, compared to 22% of low mentoring. I feel cared for by others, 58%, as opposed to 29%. I am happy with the friends I have. Mentoring, high mentoring relationships, 60%. I am happy with the friends I have, instead of 30% for low mentoring. This is those who answered very true to these things. Today I'm actively prioritizing, and I agree strongly, being close with my family, 81, caring for my emotional health. Those who are in a high mentoring relationship answer that question 71% of the time. Going back to some of the other, understanding my purpose, a high mentoring relationship, 71% of the time. Caring for people in poverty, being generous with my money. So we see that these high mentoring is just statistically across the board changes. Young adults or teens, 13 to 17, that are in the high mentoring category have significantly different responses to how their life is going on. But it's not, this is kind of an anomaly here. It's not always roses here. How often do you feel the following? Always percentage. Uncertain about the future. High mentoring at 20. Anxious about important decisions. 31. Afraid to fail. 31. Pressure to be successful. 36. A need to be perfect. 35. So high mentoring has positive effects on a lot of things, but it also, as this says, mentoring does not insulate against anxiety. So I like this idea of how to make resilient disciples, or how to engage and encourage young adults to be active in their Christian experience. Mentoring has some significant pieces to all of that, but it does not engage against anxiety, and which is interesting tell for what's going on here in our culture. And I think Springtide again helps with some of this as well. Springtide had 61% of young people agree that the adults in my life don't truly know how much I am struggling with my mental health. And they had this quote here in the research. The time I went to my youth leader with mental health concerns, I was told to pray about it. But that didn't solve anything. When that didn't work, I thought, well, not only does my mental health suck, but my faith life sucks too. So there's this idea of how to mentor, but mentoring makes huge differences in the lives of young adults. Changes how they do a lot of things, how they look at the world in a lot of ways. Disciples are handcrafted, not mass-produced. So if you get anything out of this entire presentation, it's this idea that you're not going to change the world. You're not going to be, church is not going to be able to pull in thousands of young adults. And a revival, we're not shooting for revival-like numbers with young adults. What we need to be looking for is How do individual older adults build mentoring relationships with young adults? If we could get a substantial number of older adults to spiritually mentor young adults, then we could change some of those statistical categories. But your question is not, the question we should be asking is not how do I change the world, but how do I change an individual? How do I mentor one young adult in their spiritual life and faith? And when we do, we very much easily need to be sensitive of the mental health issues. This is a topic that is totally different, but that mentoring needs to look something very specific. What kind of mentoring? And I'm going to just throw out these two books, The New Copernicans by David John Seel. That's, I mentioned it a little bit earlier with the functional atheism. But this idea, it's a little bit more heady, but this Generation Z Unfiltered by Tim Elmore and Andrew McPeak. If you anything Tim Elmore does is just great. Putting those two books together, if I were to answer this question, what kind of mentoring? It would have to be practical. It must help them navigate their actual lives. Their faith must make their world a better place. Exploratory, the journey is as important as the destination. Learning how answers are found is often more important than the answer itself. Doubt, honest questions must be allowed. Experiential. Hospitality might be the most important spiritual gift moving forward. Relational, belonging before believing. There might be people who belong to your group or who you're mentoring long before you ever come to any sort of belief or deep level conversations. Mentoring needs to be purposeful and meaningful. And kind of the last idea, this is the oldest book I'm going to reference here, but I think it's important. This book is written by Don Everts and Doug Schaupp by InterVarsity Press. And Doug Schaupp was an InterVarsity campus ministry in California. This book's written about 2008. But they saw over the course of the ministry about 2,000 young adults, college students, come to a first-time faith in Christ, or committed to Christianity, committed to following Jesus, however you want to phrase it. They saw this, and they did some kind of like anecdotal. It's not necessarily research because they didn't collect the data that way, but from the stories of these significant number of young adults who made commitments to Christ on the West Coast mostly through InterVarsity, they saw a trend, a pathway. And so the book's called I Once Was Lost, What Postmodern Skeptics Taught Us About Their Path to Jesus. And there were 5 steps. Trusting a Christian, forming a relationship with a Christian was the first step. Becoming curious, being interested in a sense difference and perspective. Opening up to change, being willing to adjust their behavior in order to live a better life. Then seeking after God, asking specific questions about Jesus. And then entering the kingdom, usually in response to a direct invitation to commit to following Jesus. So it's this idea, this is the pathway. Relationship comes first. That relationship produces curiosity, and not necessarily curiosity in becoming a Christian or curiosity even in Jesus. Hey, wait a minute, your life is different. Let me ask some questions. Very, very low-key sort of curiosity stuff. Opening up to change. Oh, wait a minute, your life is different. I've been curious. I've been asking these questions. I might want to live my life in a different way as well, based on what I've seen going on in yours. Then, after a successful change or something like that, then there's this, okay, there might be something to this Jesus thing. Let me specifically engage in this idea. And at the end, Doug Schaupp would probably rephrase it this way. There needs to be this time, okay, you know a decent amount about Jesus. Are you interested in following him? Or there's nothing else, you got enough information. There's nothing else out there that's going to drastically change the picture you've already discovered about Jesus. You have enough information now. You've seen enough to make a decision. What do you want? That asking of it was an important thing they saw in the experience. So, in conclusion, the last idea, 2 Timothy 1:5-7. I am reminded of your sincere faith, Paul talking to Timothy, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and are persuaded now lives in you also. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of hands. For the Spirit of God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. I strongly believe that the spiritual lives of young adults will be determined by hands-on, practical, and personal investment of older adults in their lives. So that's what's going on. Here are the references. If you want to check any of this out, this information will be in the comment section below. We'd love to engage with you on anything that presented here. We can go deeper. There's a ton more information at any one of these things than what was there. This is just how I'm processing this stuff myself at this time. Thank you for your time. Hopefully it was helpful.